All right, welcome to the Countless Vlogcast. My guest today is author Lee Murray. How are you, Lee?
Hi, I'm good. How are you, Justin?
I'm doing well. So tell us about yourself. How long you been writing and how long you been an author for?
I've been a full-time writer for about 10 to 12 years now. Yeah, but I'm formerly a scientist and I write science fiction, fantasy, and horror generally. Just 10 years full-time. It's hard to make a living as a writer, but I thought I'd jump in, and I'm very lucky actually. My children were at home at the time, and my husband said, "Look, we need you to be at home. My son has some learning difficulties," so I kind of took the opportunity to upskill myself in writing at that time, and so it just was a good time for me.
So what inspired you to start writing and become from that process? What made you more serious about writing?
Look, I've always been a scribbler, Justin. I think that's true of lots of writers. It's sort of something that's kind of natural to them. They're always sort of thinking about storytelling. I think I got it mostly from my dad, actually. And he died recently in lockdown, so I've been thinking about this a lot. But he was one of these oral storytellers, and I think that's he would tell us stories, my brothers and sisters and I, on his lap before bedtime. He'd make these stories up out of nothing. And when we were going on a road trip, for example, we did a lot of that because my grandparents lived at the other end of the country. He would keep us entertained. It was in the days before, you had screens in the backs of cars and all that sort of stuff for kids, and to keep us entertained, and there were four of us, he would tell us these wonderful sagas, and he'd make it up as we went along using the landscape. And he would tell stories, for example, about my cousin, like he'd make a character that we knew, and he'd say, "Oh, she's missed the car and she wants to come on this trip with us, and she's running along behind us, and oh, she's run through a barn now and she's picked up a couple of chickens," and really fun stuff. And we would love this, when I think back on it, it was classic storytelling. Here's a problem, here's a character, here's a problem, and now you've got to get your character over this obstacle, and how are they going to use their resources and their own character traits to solve this issue. And then there'd be another barrier and another barrier, and that the character always has this one goal. And in this particular story, when we were doing the road trip, our cousin, the character, wanted to catch up with us so that they could come on this road trip with us and join in the fun. And as kids, we used to throw up these barriers. We'd go, "Hey, Dad, look, there's a cow," or something like that. "Oh no, she's run through a washing line and now she can't see because she's got a sheet on her face," stuff like this. And I'm really grateful for that childhood learning experience, that my father just instilled this love of story in me. And I think it's true of my brothers and sisters as well, although they've gone into other sort of creative pursuits. But I just think that is just, I've been thinking a lot about it lately since my dad died, because how grateful I am for that grounding in oral storytelling, that just really gave me that inspiration to write. And then I was very lucky to have the opportunity, and my husband said, "Look, you're home, why don't you take advantage of it? You've always talked about writing, why don't you just do it?" So I've been very privileged in that sense, and it is very hard to make a living, but I don't need to, in a sense. Like I'm able to support my writing in other ways. So I have been very lucky, and I think that is something that I'm very aware of, the privilege of being able to be creative and to write, because especially in these very difficult and dark times.
So how did you discover your genre of writing? With such an imagination and such a wide variety of ideas, how did you discover your genre?
Look, it's interesting. I started out really with a chicklet of all things. People used to say you should always write what you know. And at the time, I was about that 10 or 12 years ago, I was running a lot of marathons and doing a lot of ultra marathoning, running, long distance stuff. And so I thought, well, I should write what I know. So I wrote a chicklet novel about, a girl who who was running her first marathon, and all the kind of barriers that get thrown up. And it was lots of fun, and I learned so much, and I learned about how to publish and how to put it together a cover, because I made some awful, dreadful mistakes at the beginning, all those kinds of things. And so that was a great learning book, if you like, for me. And I think, and then after that, I realized that I wanted to deal with more darker, more relevant themes. Not that there's anything wrong with chick lit, and I love that escapism, but I really wanted to delve into sort of more relevant themes that resonated for me, and that sort of led me down the dark side to speculative fiction. So
what's your recent book titled, and did you discover?
Yeah, my recent book is this one here. It's called Grotesque Monster Stories, and it's a collection of monster stories, effectively, all sorts of different forms of monsters, obviously, humans as monsters, and monsters, and cryptids and golems, and zombies, all sorts of things like that. So a bit of fun, really, and it does involve a lot of New Zealand cultural stories as well. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I've also been working on this, which I haven't got up the book yet, but it's called Black Cranes. And I'm also an editor, and so I'm working on curating this collection of dark stories by Southeast Asia, horror writers of Southeast Asian descent. So that's another exciting project.
As a writer and editor, do you publish? Do you self-publish? Or use a publisher?
Oh, I do both. In the early days, I self-published, and I really encourage any writer to self-publish at least once to get an understanding of what a publisher does. But in general, my work is published by traditional publishers, but I also do a bit of a hybrid. So I think most people do now, just to have a bit of a bit of breadth and a little bit more opportunity to flex their muscles in other places. So. And I think it's important to be in lots of places. So yeah, I think there's a place for all of that.
So who are some of your influences in the horror genre and the monster genre, like that you like aspire to be like, or like that influence your writing?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? I feel like I'm a New Zealand writer of horror fiction, and so there's a kind of pervasiveness in New Zealand writing, that there's this underlying darkness, if you like, this gothic feel to New Zealand, because in New Zealand, our culture sort of lends itself to that. We're an isolated place. In the past, we lived at distance from each other. We had lots of forest and very bleak landscape, and so there's this idea here in New Zealand that we walk very close to the veil, and also it's part of our everyday culture, this wonderful Maori mythology, in which the landscape is part of our part of our ancestral background. So there's this notion that mountains and rivers and forests represent the ancestors, because they have effectively nurtured us and kept us alive and looked after us. So there's this wonderful idea that spirits walk very close to us in real life, and so that's a lovely thing to explore as a writer. So when I say, when you ask me about what my influences are, it's actually really hard, because New Zealand horror writing darkness has been sort of pervasive amongst New Zealand writers in general in the past. And we're moving now towards this wonderful renaissance of Maori writers, Pacifica writers in New Zealand, whereas in the past, because we have a colonial history, a little bit like in the United States, those stories have been dominated by the colonial sort of the colonial voice, if you like. And so it's not lovely that we're moving more towards giving a voice to these more to these marginalized voices, if you like. So when I say, so, you know, my New Zealand influences might be people like Catherine Mansfield, who did write rather dark stories. You know, she talked about that time at twilight in New Zealand where, you know, that there's a very long period of twilight and it's sort of ghostly and eerie. And so those kinds of things have influenced me in a way. But obviously I like lots of horror fiction. Karen Warren's a favorite, and everyone loves Stephen King, of course. And but I particularly, there's some absolutely fantastic women writers out there whose fiction I particularly like. In the horror field, you know, I like Gwendolyn Kist, and I like Stephanie Wojtowicz, and just some, you know, amazing women dark fiction writers. And so I'm sort of tending to read more of those lately.
So when you do a character or like a book, do you do it in a sense of darkness, or do you do it in a sense of like imagination, or how do you like portray your characters? So I know you said a lot of influences was dark writing too, but do you find yourself like gearing more towards that like more, or do you find yourself like telling your story like as an imagination, like how you want to see like a half and half, like a balance with light and dark in your writing?
Yeah, I think when you write horror, there's always some hope, because it's when you explore these dark themes that you find a way through, or you create distance, you create an opportunity to look for solutions. And just for putting those dark things on the page allows you to they become concrete, and you're in control of them when you put them on the page. So, but all like to think all my stories are character driven, and I try to look for authenticity. And one of the things I do is I do a sort of mosaic or ensemble novels where you get different perspectives. So you have different characters speaking at certain times in the novel, so that you understand that this person has this perspective, and so each person reflects differently on a story, don't they? And so, I mean, you can't have one voice, can you? And this is the beauty of being an author, is that we can put ourselves in different characters' heads and create a story from different perspectives. So I hope that my characters are authentic and real, and embody some sort of real experience, which I'm putting on the page as fantasy or speculative fiction. Well, I hope that's the case. So, I mean, I'm sure you must do that too. As a writer and a poet, you must be putting yourself in other people's. It's not always our own perspective. We try to.
Start
Yeah.
out like what you see from outside too, like your environment too. It's not just like from the inside influences, like a lot what you see like inside. Like with my writing is more like a rap slash hip hop slash poetry kind of thing too. So I like make it like a music kind of thing too. So I'm like telling, and I'm just like trying to put like I'm like start me it's like keep it it's like some darkness too, but I always try to put some light in it too, and then like or like something like I don't want it to be like too depressing, you know, like somebody be like, oh, this like switches too, but it makes sense in the story, you know.
Yeah, but you want that authenticity, that real experience, right? So you're drawing on your life experience, your music, understanding of music, and how that makes people feel, right? Yeah. And I mean, music is a great analogy, because, you know, music is uplifting at one moment, and then the next moment it can be very sad and very and can really embody those those feelings of poignancy, and also fear. You know, if you think how you can use music and beat to create that sensation of fear and suspense, I think that's a really good example.
So what's been like the feedback from your books now? So how did your audience perceive or receive your books, you know, and like your storytelling?
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I've had some really great response to not everybody loves your work, and I think that's a good thing too. If there are some people that say, it's not for me, then at least they're reading it and you're provoking something. But in general, the response has been great. To Grotesque Monster Stories, which has only got 11 stories in it, I've had lots of reviews, and the people have come and said, look, you know what, we like this one, and someone else has said, no, I like this story, and someone else has said, no, I like this story, and no one seems to have liked exactly the same story. So I'm quite confident that it's a nicely well balanced collection. And that there's a little bit of something for everyone in there.
So who is your audience you tailor to? I know it's probably like hard, but in terms of like demographics, who's like your like age wise, who do you want to tailor your books to? Or
Oh, well, this one is particularly for adults, I think. There is one story that's kind of slightly pitched YA, but generally there's lots of adults reading YA anyway, as you can imagine. So generally that's at adults, but I do write for children as well. I have several books for children. In fact, you can probably see up here on the wall. That is one of my first books for children. It's called Battle of the Birds, and it's set here in New Zealand. It's a time travel adventure. About the war between the flighted birds and the unflighted birds, if you like. I don't know if there's a word for that, because New Zealand has a lot of flightless birds like the kiwi, and so I wrote a story, a fantasy story for children, like a first fantasy, and that one won New Zealand's Sir Julius Vogel Award for best novel for youth. So
when you're writing, do you do a lot of your writing outside? Do you like, or do you do more imagining, or do you do more like sightseeing writing too? Like you see an image and like you just write, or do you do a combination of the two?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm very inspired by landscape, and so I do often travel to the places that I'm writing about to give me just to give me that inspiration, and to be sure that I'm being authentic and representing my story, my setting well, and especially because setting plays such a big part in New Zealand fiction, because again, as I mentioned before, it's sort of it leads into our ancestry, into our history and our mythology. But yeah, in general, yeah, it's a bit of both, a bit of straight out of my imagination, and sometimes I do some literary pilgrimages, if you like, to places, just to be sure that I'm writing from an authentic, from a place of authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like for myself, it's like getting a new idea, just like going to different places too. I like to like travel now, but you can't travel like really much right now because of what's going on and all that too. But this is like I'm going outside, maybe go to the park and just like sitting there for a few minutes too, seeing children playing and like birds flying, like different stuff like that too. So how was the pandemic like affect? I know you've been writing too, but when you first like were in lockdown too, how was that like affecting your creativity?
Yeah, no, it's been rubbish. Especially with my dad dying, and that was stressful, because we couldn't have a funeral, and there were no flowers, and we couldn't see friends and family, and my brothers couldn't come, and they live a little bit further away, and so they weren't able to come, and it was very, very hard. So I have, a little bit like you, I've just been using poetry as a way of expressing, keeping a record of the pandemic. In fact, I have written sort of quite a number of poems, because mostly haiku, actually, and because if you can't write 17 syllables, there's something wrong. You can't really call yourself a writer. But I really did struggle with my creativity, and so I've just been trying to plot away at this, keeping a poem every couple of days, just to keep a record of what's happening in my life at the moment. But what I found is that because I'm also an editor and curate anthologies, I've been able to work on those projects more. When you're working with other people, you're still keeping your hand in, but you're not actually having to bring it all out of your own imagination. So I've tended to do more of that work, and put aside my own creativity. Although I have got 6 story commissions, so I really need to get my act into gear and start writing those.
So when you're like self-publishing too, if you give advice out there to people out there, like maybe the like first time like writers and authors out there, like in terms of going to self-publishing, bro, could you give them some advice?
Self-publishing. Well, I think one of the first things about self-publishing is that you need to write the best book you can possibly write. You need to get it edited properly. You need to make sure you have 1 or 2 more coming down the pipeline, and because that whole write, publish, repeat mantra really works for the self-publishing people. I also recommend looking into things like building your newsletter so that you can share ideas with, share readership with other people. That's really helpful. And also I recommend getting a copy of Deb Potter's book on Amazon ads. I forget the title of it. But if you're looking to self-publish, then also you'll need to market your book, and that's a really good text for helping you get on top of that marketing side. So those are my little tips for self-publishing. I wish I could follow them myself, but those are the things that I think the self-publishing people are tending to do.
So what is your next project coming up, or something you want to work on or learn and expand on moving forward?
Well, like you, I have a poetry project that I'm working on. And so fingers crossed, I hope that comes about. I'm working on a sort of a project on Asian perspectives in New Zealand. So just a poetry project that ties in our New Zealand mythology and also our Asian mythology. So I'm looking forward to moving forward with that. I'm also working on some screenwriting and putting some of my stories onto the screen. So that work needs to be, I need to get my head around that, which is quite a different media. So so working on that as well. Next, just finished. I finished my trilogy with Dan Raybarts. We write a series of books. This is the series here. It's called The Path of Ra, and the third book in that series is coming out in November. So I'll be gearing up to do some little bit of marketing and creating some buzz around that book as well. So I think I've got quite a lot on my plate for the next few months. As you can imagine, I like to spread myself around, and that's a bit of a problem because I'm not very focused on one thing at a time.
So if you could like take one of those projects, what would be your top one? If you could look forward maybe like 3 to 4 months from now, what would be I know it's gonna take longer than that, but if you could look forward, like hypothetically, and take one of those projects, which one would you like mostly like to like see like published it out there for an audience to see?
Oh, look, I really need to think about my readers, and I write this series called The Tane McKenna Adventures. That's the series. There are 3 books actually. I've just got 2 on my desk at the moment. These ones here, and Into the Mist. It's just been published in German, and it's doing very well at the moment. I can't pronounce the thing in German, but anyway, I have that, and the readers are asking for more of those, and there are a couple of short stories coming out in that world, but the readers are demanding another novel, and I have an idea germinating here. So I really in the next 4 months, the thing I need to get onto most is writing another book in that series. They all stand alone, but I do need to, because I'm getting some rather irate, like not quite George R.R. Martin type complaints, but I'm getting some complaints from readers who are saying, come on, where's the next book? We need another book. So that is something I do enjoy that world, and I love those characters. So I would like to get back to that.
It's that balance between what the audience wants and what you want too.
Yeah. And also stretching myself. The poetry collection is stretching myself a little bit and challenging myself to do something different. So, it's really hard, isn't it, to get that fine balance of, the projects, the community projects I like to do to support my colleagues, the things that the readers want, and also the things that just extend me a little bit more and increase my versatility.
Awesome. So this one, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I've gone blah, 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 blah.
Social media, websites, all that. Where can people find you at?
Yes, you can find me on leemurray.info is my website. I'm at Lee Murray Writer on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. I have a readers group called Monster Readers. So if you just search on that and click through, and we'll let you in. It's private, so and that's where I kind of post the discounts and things like that. I also have a newsletter, so if people look at my website leemurray.info, then they'll find the place to subscribe to that. And I do often put some of my colleagues' work that they're putting out for free or discounted. So readers who looking for a bit of a bargain might like to sign up there.
All right. Thank you again for coming on and sharing. That was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin. It was a pleasure.
It was great. And thank you guys for watching. Everybody watching this, I'm going to be on YouTube. Make sure you guys subscribe. Countless Vlogcast. Make sure you guys support Lee. And thank you guys for watching.